The Inventor, out for blood in Silicon Valley. In March 2019, HBO released a documentary that would become the definitive autopsy of one of Silicon Valley's biggest frauds. Elizabeth Holmes walked into Theranos in 2003 with a promise, a machine that could run hundreds of medical tests from a single drop of blood. By 2015, her company was valued at $9 billion. She was on magazine covers. She was compared to Steve Jobs. Then, in 2015, the Wall Street Journal published an article by John Carreyrou that said almost none of it worked. Within 3 years, Theranos was dissolved. Holmes faced criminal charges. And we learned that the entire empire was built on lies told to investors, regulators, employees, and patients. This is how a company with a board full of generals, politicians, and billionaires collapsed under the weight of its own deception. Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford in 2002. She was 19. She told people she had a vision, a blood testing device so small and efficient that it would upend an entire industry worth billions of dollars. The premise was simple on the surface. Traditional blood tests require vials of blood sent to massive labs. They take days. They're expensive. Holmes said she could do it all on a thumbprick in real time. In 2003, she founded Theranos. The name was a mashup of therapy and diagnosis. She designed the company's machines and called them Edisons, a direct reference to Thomas Edison, the inventor who failed repeatedly before succeeding. That comparison mattered. It licensed her failures in advance. She raised money. First from family money, then from venture capitalists. The pitch was flawless. By 2013, Theranos had partnered with Walgreens to open blood testing kiosks in stores nationwide. By 2015, Holmes had appeared on the cover of Fortune magazine in a black turtleneck, painted as the next Steve Jobs. She was worth $4.5 billion on paper. She was the world's youngest self-made female billionaire. But inside the company, something was breaking. Theranos employees who had just graduated college, like Tyler Schultz and Erica Chung, were seeing problems no one else was allowed to acknowledge. The machines didn't work reliably. Test results were inconsistent. When they raised concerns, they were told they weren't team players. Error reports were buried. Schultz and Chung began documenting everything. In 2015, Chung wrote a letter to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services detailing safety violations. Schultz provided confidential information to John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal. On October 15, 2015, Carreyrou's article was published. It alleged massive fraud. Theranos had misrepresented the capability and accuracy of its technology. The company had used competitor machines from companies like Quest Diagnostics and LabCorp to run most of its tests, hiding this fact from investors and partners. Holmes had made false claims about military deployment and pharmaceutical partnerships that never materialized. The article was 3,000 words of systematic destruction. Theranos responded with lawyers and lawsuits. Holmes hired David Boies, a legendary trial attorney. She attacked Carreyrou's credibility. She denied everything. But the evidence kept coming. In January 2016, the FDA placed restrictions on Theranos' test menu. Walgreens ended its partnership. In March 2018, Theranos dissolved. In June 2018, Holmes was indicted on charges of wire fraud and conspiracy. She faced up to 20 years in prison. But here's what the documentary reveals that the headlines missed: the real failure wasn't a technical problem that spiraled. It was a choice. Director Alex Gibney shows footage of Holmes and her COO Sunny Balwani at company events, making grand statements about their technology. They're not discussing engineering. They're not troubleshooting. They're performing. They're managing the narrative. They're behaving like they're running a marketing campaign, not a medical device company. Phyllis Gardner, a Stanford medical professor, had warned Holmes in 2002 that her core idea was scientifically flawed. The human body can only produce a certain amount of blood in a given time. You can't run 200 tests on a thumbprick because there isn't enough biological material. Gardner later served on the Harvard Medical School Board of Fellows that nominated Holmes as a peer. She watched as Holmes was elevated despite this fundamental physics problem remaining unsolved. The hidden truth isn't that Holmes was incompetent. It's that she was never actually trying to solve the engineering problem. Instead, she solved the investor and media problem. She hired Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, James Mattis, and Sam Nunn to her board. Not scientists. Not blood testing experts. Political heavyweights and military figures. Their names on a letterhead made the company credible. Roger Parloff, a Fortune magazine editor, wrote a glowing cover story in 2014. When he later realized he'd been deceived, he published a follow-up acknowledging his error. But by then, the narrative had calcified. The employees who tried to object, Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz, both in their 20s, were treated as threats. Holmes and Balwani led employee chants against their competitors, Quest and LabCorp. Paranoia became company culture. They hired personal bodyguards. They treated legitimate scientific concerns as corporate espionage. Ian Gibbons, Theranos' chief biochemist, did the actual work behind the patents Holmes filed. When he told Holmes the technology had problems, he was sidelined. After Carreyrou's article was published, Gibbons died by suicide. His widow, Rochelle Gibbons, would later speak to the pressure and isolation he experienced. The real story is this: Theranos wasn't brought down by a failure to innovate. It was brought down by a failure to stop lying when lying stopped working. Holmes had built a company on a foundation of manufactured certainty. That worked as long as no one looked close. The moment John Carreyrou started asking questions and Tyler Schultz and Erica Chung started documenting answers, the structure collapsed because there was nothing underneath it. The lesson here extends beyond Theranos. It's about what happens when a founder believes that controlling the story is the same as controlling reality. Theranos had brilliant people. It had hundreds of millions of dollars. It had a board that included some of the most powerful figures in America. What it didn't have was a willingness to admit failure and correct course. In most business failures, you can point to a specific mistake, a market shift, a technology that didn't pan out, a competitor that outmaneuvered them. Theranos is different. The company failed because its leadership chose performance over honesty, and because the systems designed to catch fraud, journalism, whistleblower protections, board oversight, only work when people inside the organization are willing to break ranks. Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz did. Everyone else stayed silent until it was too late. The real scandal isn't that Elizabeth Holmes fooled powerful people. It's that powerful people, given every signal that something was wrong, chose to look away. They had the credibility to ask hard questions. They didn't. And that silence, that choice to not investigate, was as much a part of the fraud as Holmes's lies.